Welcome to the first episode of the Hard for Life podcast. In this episode, I share my story about porn, drug addiction, blackmail, and how it ultimately led me to deep fulfillment and learning how to heal shame. This story is very intimate for me, and in a lot of ways I resisted sharing it because of my fears around how my friends and family would perceive me. And it's also been like an anchor around my back, keeping me from going really big in life. I've struggled to share myself publicly because of my fears around this story coming to light, and that it would somehow negatively impact my career. The irony is that it's been negatively impacting my career by me not sharing the story. It's kept me small for most of my adult life. And in that way, sharing it is in perfect alignment with the mission of this podcast, which is to learn to become profoundly intimate with life from the most radical people on the planet. And as you will hear in this first episode, I've done some pretty radical things in my life, and I have even more experiences to share on future episodes. So for now, sit back, enjoy as I go hard for life in sharing my radical experience of doing porn in college and where it has ultimately led me on today's episode of the Hard for Life podcast.
You are listening to the Hard for Life podcast with Thomas Scott.
So to start this podcast out, I want to share a bit about my story and where I came from and how I got into doing what I do right now. Presently, I am an executive men's coach for high-performing men. And within my coaching containers, I go in with guys that have made a lot of money and hit a lot of material success, but haven't found that deep sense of fulfillment, that deep burning connection to their passion and their fuller expression of life. And in those spaces, I've gotten to see men in their shame. I've gotten to see men in their scared. I've gotten to see men in all sorts of levels of healing. And of course, I've gone through my own. And that's the journey I want to share here on this first podcast, the journey of what I grew through in order to get to where I am now. I grew up in a very Catholic family. It was a very loving, amazing family that I am still connected with today. And that connection has grown and deepened over time. And I didn't start out with a deep, intimate, fulfilling connection with my family and my parents particularly. I was the black sheep of the family growing up. I imagine some of you listening to this might associate with. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and I set out on life on my own path. And that path was one that was foreign to anybody in my family or the paths that they had taken. And it caused a really high degree of separation between me and my parents and my siblings. And through that separation, I learned to cope with my challenges in life by isolating and by really seeking to succeed as an external measure of validation for myself. And that seeking to succeed led me to try a lot of different paths. And particularly one of these paths was one that I took in college that threatened to undermine every aspect of my life moving forward when I did it. And that was I became a porn star. And that experience was both the most traumatic experience I've had in my life, I imagine, to this point, as well as the biggest blessing, because it's the one that is going to unlock everything that I am here to bring through the Hard for Life podcast. And it requires a high degree of vulnerability to share this story, a high degree of emotional courage, because that single experience has come back to haunt me many, many times in my life. And for you who are listening to this, I imagine you can relate to the experience of shame and to the experience of doing something that I deeply regretted after doing it and having the consequences affect you for a long time. I imagine you have your own skeleton in your closet, or the thing that you did that you haven't shared or you have shared, but either way, it challenges you on some level to show up in the face of what others would perceive as a negative thing. So this is my story. So my junior year of college, I had gotten a DUI. I had been partying at one of the bars, and it was a really crazy experience because I got in my car afterwards, and I actually hadn't been drinking so much. I was over the legal limit, but barely. And this is not condoning drunk driving, but in college, it's one of those things. Who here listening to this podcast has not had a few drinks in college and then got behind the wheel of a car? Well, I did that. And when I did, due to the way I had parked, I had popped my car up on top of a curb to park it. I had an SUV at the time, and this bar was kind of near a field. And so I popped the curb and parked in the field where the rest of the cars had parked. And I didn't know that when I did that, it cracked the steering column in my SUV. So I had my time at the bar, and then I got into the car, backed out, and turned the wheel. And then when I went to go straight, the steering column broke all the way and my wheel wouldn't straighten out, and I plowed right into the car right next to me because I thought the car was going to go straight, and it went left. And I did it at closing time from the bars. So like 100 people saw this thing. So there wasn't a like getting out of it or like sending him a note and saying I'll pay him back or whatever. It was like, oh, cops will be here soon. So I just got out of the car and waited. And that experience alone was very scary. I imagine any of you who've gotten a DUI before can relate to the fear from just that alone. Because in the corporate world, when you get a DUI, it can totally fuck up your perspective of getting a job. And you have to like list it on job applications and resumes and shit like that, which is really crazy. And I mean, I understand why, but at the same time, it can really fuck you. And these are those types of decisions that we make that in the moment, you don't think about how it's going to have consequences for the rest of your life. And so anyways, I plowed into the car next to me and then just sat and waited. And it wasn't a bad wreck. Nobody got hurt, but I knew the police would be there shortly and I wasn't going to run. So I sat, the police showed up, and I was taken to jail and given my DUI. And at the time, due to my Catholic upbringing and my relationship with my parents, which was already extremely estranged at this point, I did not want them to know about this. And I also happened to be male modeling at the time, which is something that I feel shy to share on the podcast. There's so many stories that I have from that time of just shit that I was doing that I imagine in sharing in this form will help me integrate. And this is also just a little permission slip for any of you who are listening to share your stuff, because in sharing it and owning it, that like name of the game, Hard for Life here, is to own all the things that we're feeling shy and shame and scared about. And to own that is to integrate it, is to bring it back home. And so I was male modeling, and when I male modeled, I would get hit up very regularly to do porn because they would see me and they, knew I was attractive and had a propensity to be on camera, I guess. And I was also easy to get a hold of at the time. This was like right at the beginning of social media. So like Facebook had just been invented and was not used the way it was. There was no Instagram. There was no OnlyFans, none of that stuff. This was like good old fashioned, Playboy style, dial up, not quite dial up, but like internet was still very like not great at this time type of experience. So I got hit up, had this DUI. The offer that I saw paid very well, like really well, especially for college and especially at that time. And so I was like, oh, this is perfect. This will cover all of my DUI expenses. And so I went for it. And I thought nobody would find out at all. I thought this was going to be like something that I did that I just got to keep under the rug and no one would know. And I'd make my cash. I'd pay off my DUI. All good, all clean. So I go and film. And it was a really wild experience. I felt like a rock star. I got flown out to LA. They took me in a nice car, put me up in a nice hotel. Like, I was given the world. I was given a really amazing treatment, dinners every night, and then flown back after filming, just quick and easy. And the experience itself, I'm sure I'll share in a future podcast, but a lot of shame around that experience. And at the same time, it was addictive because I got my check and nobody knew. And little did I know that in the game at the time, the porn companies would pre-record a decent amount of content and then launch to help give the new star a big boost up, because they actually made money based on how well the person did. So they invited me to do more videos. And at the time I was like making a lot of money. Nobody knew what was going on because it hadn't been launched yet. And I didn't even know how popular this site was that I was doing the videos for. And so I went out and filmed quite a bit more and was living a total rock star lifestyle in LA. It was a lot of fun. I would go out and get treated amazingly. They'd take us to strip clubs and everybody knew who we were. Not me necessarily, because I hadn't been launched yet, but a bunch of the guys I was with for sure. And it was a great time. And so it was this interesting path of like doing something I knew I shouldn't be doing, that was also self-sabotage at a high degree, but also having a lot of fun, making a lot of money, and having a wildly new experience. As a Catholic boy from the Midwest going out to LA and doing porn, it was like a fucking mind-bending, Burning Man level experience. And 4 months later, I think is how long it was before they went live with it, I was flush with cash. I'm sitting at my college dorm and having a good time. And I get a message from one of my friends saying, dude, you have to go check out this forum. At the time, there was this awful, awful forum called Juicy Campus, which is like this internet place. It was like a precursor to the Dirty. And I'm fairly certain the guys that created this thing went to jail. But you could post anything you wanted about people on your campus. And there was even like revenge porn. There was like, you could like see all of the dirty, dirty gossip happening on your campus. And you could search by your campus and you could search by way too many details. And people would put extremely personal, incriminating stuff and they could share it anonymously. And so it was like 4chan meets the Dirty meets like a fucking revenge porn site. It was awful. It was like, and it was only around for a very short period of time, but right then was when my porn went live. And at that point, it went to the top of my college campus's forum. And everybody found out. Everybody. The whole fucking school. And that was trippy. Because at the time it was very frowned upon. It was not a socially acceptable thing at all. And I took a lot of heat. I was working as a houseboy for one of the sororities there, which meant I just made meals for the sororities and I got paid. That was like my job. I got fired. They called me what was the term they used? A sexual deviant. That is why I got fired from that job. I was formerly in a fraternity. I had quit, and the fraternity, like all the guys in it were horrendous in the bullying about this thing. I was getting phone calls from my siblings saying that people were harassing them with it. It was sent to pretty much everybody I knew. At the time, somebody even went as far as taking the link to it, like, and sending it to every single one of my friends on Facebook. They just systematically, at the time you could like see who people's friends were. So they just sent the link to every single friend on my friends list in Facebook. And that really created a level of shame that I have spent years and years and years integrating. And part of that integration is launching this podcast and using that work to help men open up these things, because that shame held me back in a lot of ways from a lot of things in life. And it also had been weaponized against me many, many times in the past. So I grew past that experience, but I remember the day being I was walking back to my college dorm and wanted to cry, but, definitely couldn't cry on a college campus as a boy, and calling the porn company and begging them to take it down and that I'd give the money back and all these things. And they were like, no, we're not going to do that. And it was really fucking rough, like really fucking rough. There's been many nights as I've done healing work holding that version of myself and just trying my best to soothe him and be like, yo, you didn't fuck up your life. You didn't. And I know that to be true because here I am sitting on this podcast sharing this story, and I've done so much good for the men in my life. There's so many men that I hold space for that because of that experience, I can go deep with them. I can go into their shame because I know it at a really, really high level. And I ended up after college doing a corporate job, found a corporate job, hated it, fucking hated corporate life. That was not for me. And I lived that experience. I worked at a bank. I also did sales for a life insurance company, which was very not me. And, anything I could do to get by, but also like desperately afraid of anybody finding out about this dirty secret that I had, especially my parents. Somehow my parents didn't know. Out of everybody that got sent it, my parents didn't have it, but every time I went home, there was a level of like, oh, fuck. Today's the day that I'm going to have that conversation with mom and dad. Someone sent it to them. And I never had to have that conversation until I chose to have it a few years ago. But that's giving away a little bit of the story right now. Thankfully, I didn't. But, the level of fear and shame of always going home when I already had an estranged relationship with my parents at the time caused more trauma in my system. It was just more and more stuff getting shoved down and being held. And so I dipped out of the corporate world after a couple of years trying that and decided that I wanted to really go all in on whatever the fuck I wanted to do. I'd already done porn. Nothing was really fulfilling me at this point, and I was feeling very empty and alone and lost. So I joined a band, and I had been playing guitar for many years, and I had met some guys that were in what I thought was going to be a very successful band. And at the time, it was mildly known in my city. But I still had a lot of fun, and we toured. We went down to Nashville and played a couple gigs, and I got to live the sex, drugs, and rock and roll era, so to speak. I was bartending for money, and I was really just going down the path of sleeping with a lot of women and seeing how much validation I could get from that, and using that as a way to soothe this voice in my head that said I sucked, this voice in my head that hated myself, this voice in my head that said I wasn't worthy of what I wanted or was permanently fucked up. And I hit a really, really strong rock bottom with that after a few years of drug abuse and just leading an all-out unfulfilling, but what I thought was fulfilling. Like, it was like, if I just have sex with one more hot woman, or if I just make a little bit more money, or if I just party harder at this next thing, or make a few more friends or whatever. Meanwhile, I was more and more isolated. I was more and more like blocked off from the world around me. I had no connection with my body. I was in the most physical pain I've ever been in. And I was taking all sorts of amphetamines and energy drinks to keep myself even awake during the day. And that led me to a dark end, basically. Like, I hit a point of that being unsustainable. And I'm going to pause here and put a little trigger warning that anybody listening to this, I'm about to talk about something very emotionally challenging. And if conversations around taking your own life trigger you, now is the time to fast forward on the podcast. I will move through this quickly, but I want to give you some fair heads up because this stuff is hard. So with that being said, I reached a point of deep unfulfillment with this, and I tried to take my life. That experience ultimately was one of the best experiences that ever happened to me. And the reason is there are many reasons for that, but one of the biggest ones is that my mom was the first person I called. And we had been very estranged at that point. And when I called her, her response was perfect. It was completely perfect. She just asked me to wait. And that single thing saved my life. And I imagine that she probably drove 100 miles an hour to get to my home, which was like 30 minutes away. Because she got there in I swear 15 minutes or 20 minutes. And she didn't say anything because we weren't talking at the point, but I got in her car and she took me to her home, my parents' house, and I stayed the night. And that was my first sensation of connection that I had in a long time, because thanks to this path I was on, this lifestyle I was living, I was very isolated. When people are doing drugs, they're not very connected. They're off in their own world, at least in the people I hang out with. Yeah, you're doing them together, but it's a very individual experience. And particularly amphetamines, they're very mental and in the mind, and you're having your own mental experience with another human being present who's having their own mental experience. So I didn't feel a deep sense of connection through drugs, even though I thought I did. And the other blessing that came from that is I had reached rock bottom. And I've spoken about this a little bit in the past, but there's a level of when you reach rock bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. And so I went for life all the way. I didn't hold back anymore because I already knew I was willing to go out. And if I was willing to go out, why not try living 100%? Why not do any of the things that I had been holding back on? Why not just go for it all the way? And so I did. I did all the way. And going for it all the way led me to my entrepreneurial journey. And in that entrepreneurial journey, I ended up founding an incredible tech company, one of the largest event staffing apps in the world. Whenever you go to an event and you see temp staff workers working that event, those people were hired through my app. And I built that from scratch with a co-founder and grew it over the course of 8 years. And through those 8 years, I raised investment. I had close to 30 employees. I had many millions in transactional revenue flowing through my platform. I had hundreds of thousands of people getting work through my platform. And I was going to all sorts of tech events, all sorts of experiences, from South by Southwest to getting invited to economic development councils to speaking at entrepreneurial and investment events, all these types of things. It was really amazing. And it's really cool because I had gone from being basically a nobody druggie to a tech entrepreneur, and a very successful one at that. And I still had the shadow of the porn hanging over me. And that shadow was manifest in a story that's really wild that I'm excited to share here on the podcast, and a little sad to share on the podcast. And that is, I had a dear friend, a guy who I would have considered at the time my best friend, who was running his own tech company. And due to a bunch of bullshit that happened in his life, his tech company failed, and at the same time, his marriage failed. And I imagine whatever led to both of those things was probably something similar. I imagine it is connected to trauma. And because he was my friend and because he had a lot of experience as a founder entrepreneur, I thought it would be beneficial to my company to hire him and also help him make some money and get his feet back on the ground as he was trying to figure out how to salvage his business and his relationship. And so I brought him on board, and it felt like a very loving and friendly thing to do. It felt like the right thing to do. And at the same time, whatever he was struggling with caused him to not be present during that role. He didn't do any of the things that he agreed to do, namely which was sales. And he just got paid a salary and fucked off and did his own thing, worked on his own company. And after a few months of like coming to him regularly and saying like, hey, this isn't okay. We can't just pay you to like go work on your own stuff and not perform in any way. He got really mad and aggressive. And through that aggression, I let him go. I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on with you, but you gotta leave. And I fired him from my company. And I imagine that hit him in all the wounds that he was already struggling with that led to the loss of his company and his relationship. And it led him to take my IP from my company and sell it to my competitor. And that IP was in the form of client lists, and I don't know, basically anything he had from the company. My understanding is he gave it to them. And it was my direct top competitor at the time. And so I immediately hit him with a lawsuit. That was like, I didn't even wait. I just had learned that you never threaten a lawsuit. This was some entrepreneurial advice I got. You never threaten a lawsuit, you just go. If you're going to sue somebody, you just sue them. You don't tell them you're going to sue them, or it's just an empty threat. So I sued him right out the gate, and the company, my competitor, for taking that information because it was illegal. And he knew about my experience with porn. And the night I'd hit him with the lawsuit, he sent me a screenshot of it and proceeded for the next 3 or 4 months to absolutely slander me at the highest degree he could for a relentless campaign for the entire duration that we were running the lawsuit. And that was his tactic, to try to cancel the lawsuit. And ultimately it worked. It worked for a number of reasons. One, don't sue a broke person. That's fucking dumb. That's like the dumbest shit you can do because they can't ever pay even if you win. So I was trying to win a moral victory, and that was a very expensive moral victory to try to win. And at the same time, it just provoked him to share this more and more. So he shared it with the local newspapers. He shared it with all of my clients. He shared it with all my investors. He shared it with anybody he could fucking think of. And it was damaging. It damaged my reputation. It really brought all of the old shame back up to a really high degree. And that sucked. And it was really painful. And I let a lot of hate in my heart when that happened. A lot of hate towards him. And a lot of hate towards myself, because this thing just came back and haunted me again. And it poked at a number of old wounds, like old brotherhood wounds. Like, oh my God, I had this guy that I trusted, that was my friend, that I even tried to help out. And then he does this thing. Like, what the fuck? That, like, it caused the old isolation, everything that I had thought I had healed from with the drug use, to come back. And it reopened the door for a number of addictions for me. I fell back into a lot of addictions that I imagine we'll talk about on the podcast at some point. But those addictions were really challenging at the time. And I continued to try to run the business, but I was pretty hobbled at that point emotionally and spiritually. I didn't have a lot of energy. I was in a lot of shame, and I thought I could like tough my way through this thing. I was going to win. I was going to rally. I was going to like survive. But I can see in hindsight how that really affected me and affected the business, and was a big energetic pull, because I was focusing a lot of attention on a lawsuit. I was focusing a lot of attention on damage control instead of getting to just run my company. And I ultimately made it through, but ultimately lost the company. It's still around. It's still a successful business, but I'm out. In 2020, we were in Pop is in the events industry. And thanks to COVID, we went from having 16,000 active events on our software to 0 in the course of a couple of days. So we had a lot of events regularly, but we were also a high cost business because we were constantly rolling out tech updates and paying a lot of developers a very high salary. And so as soon as the events industry stopped, all money through the platform just essentially stopped. And we had to let go basically every single person in the company, except for some support people and one dev. And I stepped away too at that time. And I never came back. I'm still a shareholder and I still love my co-founder and the people involved in that company. And I'm so excited for them to make it a massive success and build it back. It is building back, and that's so cool. And at the same time, I am off doing my own thing. So COVID was the next kind of, we'll call it what felt like a hit. I started with the porn as a hit, then the drugs and the attempted suicide as a hit, and now I'm at COVID hitting the business. And they all felt like punches. But at the same time, it too was a blessing because it allowed me to step away from this thing that I had dedicated my life to, which was not as fulfilling as what I'm doing now. And during the course of that time, I went off and had a lot of free time on my hands. I had some money and some free time, and I went and learned a lot of things that were very exciting for me to learn. And that ultimately ended in me learning a lot about men's work. A lot. I did a lot of experiences with plant medicine and holding space for men and being held and crying in front of men and screaming and raging and letting a lot of shit out. And I found that to be so deeply, deeply fulfilling. And I found this level of connection with other men that was so profound that I've made it my life's mission to serve it up for the men around me. And it takes courage. It takes a lot of courage because men don't want to open in this way. Some men, a lot of men. A lot of men find this type of experience as weak. And in reality, through everything I've been through, I would consider it to be one of the most potent and strong experiences that I've ever had. And any man that experiences this work experiences it on a level that profoundly changes him. And when it profoundly changes him, it helps heal his relationship with his significant others. It helps him heal his relationship with his children. It helps him heal his relationship with his inner child. And all of those types of healings allow him to make more money because he's got more space in his body. He can hold more stuff. He can hold more tension. He's not constantly trying to fight a battle. He's a lot easier to work with. He's a lot better boss. He's a lot more caring father. And at the end of the day, he gets to walk away from his life and not have regret about how he only focused on money, but how he lived wildly, wildly alive. And the only way to live wildly alive is to feel everything, especially the shit that you don't want to feel, especially the stuff that's really fucking hard. And in feeling it, you move it. In feeling it, you integrate it. In feeling it, you become stronger because nothing can hurt you. Nothing can hold you back. And so that is my gift that I'm bringing to you, listener, on this first episode, is sharing this experience that could have really, really, really been the end for me. And in reality, it has been one of the biggest blessings, one of the greatest teachers, and something that I imagine is going to just keep opening and giving more and more blessings. And so this is an invitation for you to find that thing within you. What's the thing you're afraid of? What's the thing you're ashamed about doing? What did you do that you're like, fuck. I hope nobody finds out about that. That thing is your greatest medicine. When you integrate it and find that you can be grateful for it and that you can serve with it, you have found a whole new level of evolution. You have found a new level of purpose. And you found healing. And that healing is worth more money than you can ever make. It's generational. So thank you for from the bottom of my heart for listening to episode 1. I hope you found this story both interesting, inspiring, and maybe you took away some nugget from it that will support you in your life as you continue growing and reaching your next level of evolution. On the next episode, I have some very potent guests coming. Can't wait to share more about that. And I'm looking forward to having you along this journey with me as we unlock all of the medicine, all of the gifts, all of the wisdom from some of our most incredible, adventurous, insightful, and oftentimes scary and shameful experiences. So thank you for joining me on this episode of the Hard for Life podcast. See you on the next one.